So there's a freedom writer song called Ain't Gonna Let Nobody Turn Us Around. And growing up at NAACP, we learned all these different songs. We got an opportunity to meet and talk to legends that were struggling in the overall civil rights fight. I have had the opportunity of meeting certain people that I just thought they were icons in their own world. And Rosa Parks, Hazel Dukes, as we had as former guests, and Merle Evers, who was the former chair of the NAACP National Board. Joining us today, we have Dr. Janet Dewart Bell. She's a communications strategist and management consultant with a multimedia background as well as experience in public advocacy, strategic planning, fund development, media training, and education. Among her accomplishments are an Emmy for Outstanding Individual Achievement, a CBS TV affiliate in Washington, D.C., and programming for a National Public Radio honor with the Peabody Award, considered the highest award in broadcasting. She is also an ordained elder serving at First Presbyterian Church of Brooklyn, an intentionally inclusive and diverse Christian community where all are welcome. But today, she brings to us one of her greatest accomplishments and joys and gifts. She is the author of Lighting the Fires of Freedom, African American Women in the Civil Rights Movement. It's an oral history of the civil rights movement is told by 9 African American women talking about their stories, greatly enriching ourselves in the pivotal fight for civil rights. Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters in the struggle, I give you Lighting the Fires of Freedom, author Dr. Janet Dewart Bell.
Yes. All about you. Yeah. Anytime you're ready.
Thank you so much.
Welcome.
It's so kind of you to invite me. I'm so pleased to be here. And that song, usually when I give a public presentation, I start with that. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around.
You better sing.
Turn me around.
What?
Turn me around.
You better sing.
Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. I'm gonna keep on rocking, keep on talking, marching up to freedom land.
You better sing, girl.
Well, Dr.
right
Bell.
now.
Well,
Sing.
that's a great introduction.
I love the attitude.
She said, great you in. Great introduction. So you wrote this book.
Yes, I did.
And you spoke to these women.
What a pleasure.
And it started with your mom. So why don't you tell us a little about your background first?
Okay, yes. In the introduction, I talk about my mother and my grandmother. My mother was born and raised in rural Arkansas. I should say my father was raised in rural Georgia, and they were part of the northern migration. My mother stopped going to school at 8th grade because the nearest school, high school for black children, was 100 miles away in Little Rock, Arkansas. My father went to 3rd grade because they took him out for cotton picking and things like that. So I say, naturally, I would become an educator, of course, because education was so important to them and important to me. My grandmother, 4'8", less than 100 pounds. My grandparents had a 35-acre farm in rural Arkansas. They never got their 40 acres and a mule. My grandmother was fierce. In those days, insurance people would come around on a weekly basis to collect premiums. And one insurance agent showed up. Remember, this was in the 1930s. My mother was born in 1917. She was the youngest of 3 daughters. This particular insurance agent, white, they all were, did not understand that you do not mess around with Sophronia McKnight's daughters. So he did, as many people did. I always say that black women's lives and bodies did not matter. We were raped and assaulted at will and without punishment. He fondled one of the daughters in front of Sophronia McKnight, my grandmother. That would be one of my aunts. My grandmother, 4'8", less than 100 pounds, calmly walked over to the gun rack, picked up a gun, and shot to miss his ear by just about an inch.
That's what I'm talking about.
So, yes, indeed.
That's what I'm talking about.
So he wasn't entirely crazy. He left. My grandparents, fearing that they would be lynched, sent their daughters away. But they stayed. They stood their ground. They refused to give up because they would rather die than subject themselves to Jim Crow, slavery,
That's
anything
right.
like that. So after a couple weeks, nothing happened, to their surprise. Time went by, and eventually another young white insurance man showed up and looked at my grandmother and said, "Aunt Sophronia," as if nothing had ever happened. My grandmother lived to be in her 80s.
Wow.
That's
God
the
bless her.
legacy I have to uphold every day.
Every day.
Good for you.
Every day.
Like that.
Well, what a brilliant way to go against the bell curve, Dr. Bell, and do something for the legacy of your people from Arkansas, from Georgia. Here you are right now, right off Wall Street, which has its own historical value. And here we are talking about your book. What was some other things that motivated you to want to write and put this all on paper?
Yes, well, I always say the Bell's curve, and and I take a little bit after my late husband, Darryl Bell, prolific author and law professor, is that our curve always bends toward freedom, and and our partnership was one of social justice. I was raised to love and appreciate and work for the black community. I was president of the youth chapter of my NAACP in Erie, Pennsylvania, where I was born when I was 12 years old. I got it honestly from my parents, and as you know, from my grandmother
Right.
and my mother. My mother, my beautiful, brilliant mother, worked most of her life as a maid or household worker in homes. But what she always did was she believed in education. And the interesting thing is she would work for people, some of whom I went to school with, right? And I was one of the few blacks, that means like two, in my high school.
Dose.
We virtually integrated the county high schools, but those were the high schools that had the best education. And my mother said, no, you're going to go there. And so
Oh, you went to Brooklyn Tech?
No.
No,
but I could have gone to Brooklyn
know that's
Tech
right.
had I been here.
That's right.
But I wasn't here.
Well, Dr. Bell, first of all, we're honored that you're
Yes.
on this show.
I'm so pleased to be here.
No.
I walked in the room and I loved the energy, the
Yeah.
positive vibes. Of course, I've listened to shows before I came here today, and I said, "You folks are doing something. You're about something." We used to say, if you have to be about something. You have to be about positive nature, about advancement, about doing things, and about working as a community. And that's the one thing, the theme that you'll find out through the women I've interviewed is that they were grounded in black culture. They were grounded in community. They were not about themselves. They were not just about individual achievement. I write about servant leadership. They were servant leaders who worked on behalf of others. So they worked without recognition oftentimes, and they were also underappreciated. And what I have to say now is I don't want to use the past tense. The only past tense that they remained active their whole lives. Only one of the 9 women I interviewed for the book died before the book was published, and that was Eileen Hernandez. But the others are still very live and
Oh
well.
my goodness! Well, there's a story. There's a story. Rupert Richardson from the NAACP used to say, along with Hazel, that women, not only do we sell the chicken, we buy the chicken, we kill the chicken, we cook the chicken, we sell it, and we eat it. That speaks to the work that women do, especially in the civil rights movement. I wanted to ask you specifically about Diane Nash's interview. She's one of your
Yes.
and so when you spoke to her, and well, I guess you can talk about all of them, but when you sat down with these folks, did they realize they were doing something at the time when they took their stance?
Yes, they were very socially conscious, and they were very specific about how their lives should be developed and what they wanted to. Maybe they didn't know exactly what they wanted to contribute, but they had a commitment to contribute to the advancement of all of us. So yes, they knew what they were doing.
Ms. Bell, I gotta ask you. When I listen to you, I'm kind of brought back to how
Bell.
Dr. Bell. I'm brought back to like some of the leaders in my family. How I'm mesmerized by your stories, of back in the days and how your grandmother was. My grandmother was similar. Didn't take no junk. Didn't care. She would definitely pull out the gun and chase you. And I don't think she was under 100 pounds. I think she was way over that. But she will find a way to get you. So I wanted to ask you, how are you able to share these stories and impact the community that you live in?
Well, it started off I started interviewing people for my dissertation. I do have a doctorate in leadership and change. And so there's a lot more about other people in my dissertation, but for the book, y'all aren't going to sit down and read a 1,000-page tome. So we had to reduce the book. So in my dissertation, I have a real overview of women's involvement and really African American women's leadership in the civil rights movement. But the opportunity to do this book was really incredible. I was listening to your previous interview, which was fascinating to me. And how do books come about? How do things come about? I actually had met with the publisher, and I was pitching a different kind of book. And then as she was leaving, she said to me, "Well, you have a doctorate," which I got, by the way, at age, how old was I? 68. And so,
wait, my bad.
No way. Oh my God.
Now I want
this woman has a lot of personality.
You can't believe it. I would never thought you got.
That's amazing.
I thought you was going to say you had it a while ago, and I definitely didn't think your age was going to come up.
No, I tell it and I proclaim
and she has a little dance to go with it.
Because I have a history. I'm proudly born in 1946. I remember when the Brown v. Board decision came down from the Supreme Court, May 17th, 1954. I want to be, and a lot of people, and these women are also, we are histories. You know, I was saying about the book Fahrenheit 451 and the movie. See the new movie at HBO with Michael B. Jordan and others. It is scary and powerful, but it really is still the story that Ray Bradbury wrote. And at the end of it, because the books are being burned, the people have to become the books. Well, the women I interviewed are really, the books are part of the books. Their lives are part of the books. Or as Rashad Robinson of Color of Change says, part of the songbook of the civil rights movement. I said, ooh, that's pretty cool. I'm going to steal that phrase from my
What's so cool about what you're doing is the fact that we come from an oral history.
We do.
We're griots, and we do things of that nature. And yet you took that and you put it on paper, you know. And I like the fact that you so cherish your history. I was in church the other day, and the preacher, he was talking. He was like, I want everyone to reflect on who is your mother's mother and what is her name.
Yes.
And when you're able to do that, it gives you another strength. And I could tell your strength is strong.
Yes, I mean, it really does. You mentioned Diane Nash. Diane Nash, as a student at Fisk University, took over the Freedom Ride after a bus carrying freedom workers from the Congress on Racial Equality. See, that's part of that book. Core. Oh, y'all know it? All right, good.
So Merle Evans. No, go ahead. Go back to Diane. I love her story.
When the core bus, the people were violently attacked. She took over the Freedom Ride because she said, if we allow violence to stop us, we will never proceed. She passionately believes in nonviolence. I interviewed someone else, Gloria Richardson, called the Lady General of Civil Rights from Cambridge, Maryland movement. She does not passionately believe in nonviolence. She believes in it as a tactic. But Merle Evers, first of all, I want to say that the women I interviewed, I want to really lift them up because they didn't have to sit down with me and talk to me, but they were interested. Once I was able to convince them to talk to me, they were interested in telling their stories, and the one thing they wanted me to do was get it right. I'm not sure I got it right all the times, but I certainly tried to get it right. And the passion that they brought and the perspectives that they brought, not just on what they did, but what's happening now and what should be done.
The strength that they offer. Merle Evers, who would be fearful every day of her husband dying, had to continue to take on the legacy of it. And Merle Evers is a very, very, very incredible woman. And so when you spoke to her, what was her thoughts about the next steps after Merle was assassinated? When Medgar was assassinated?
Yes, what she said. First of all, they were partners in every way. And when they really both ran the Jackson, Mississippi office of the NAACP, although Medgar Evers was the field secretary. There are only two people. So Myrlie Evers did everything. She did all the administrative work. She did memorials for people who had been hurt, who had been killed. And she was born in rural Mississippi. Medgar Evers had come back from the war as a veteran, and so he had a different perspective. And so she says she essentially grew up at Medgar's side, and she talks about how she knew that his assassination was coming one day. She said, because you put yourself in that time in Mississippi, you know, in 1963. She says, we walked with death, and death walked with us every day. And she said, I knew it was coming. I would do role playing to put myself in a position of what would happen should my husband be killed. We didn't know it was coming, but she said, I had to tell myself that it was going to come someday. And as it turns out, and she said to her husband, she said, I can't live without you, I can't. And he said, no, you are stronger than you think you are. You will go on. And she talks about the conversation she had with him the night before he was assassinated.
Wow.
She did not know that was going to be the night, but she kept her promises to be the kind of woman that she needed to be, wanted to be, and that Medgar Evers wanted her to be. And I say this to young people about partnership, how important it's important to develop yourself individually, but also look for someone with whom you can share, whom you can be a part with whom you can be a partner, and with whom you can grow. And Myrlie Evers did that. Her 3 young children, and she stayed in that house where Medgar Evers was assassinated in their driveway, virtually in front of them. They stayed in that house for about a year, until after that it was just 2. You talked earlier about mental health issues. They didn't help us with post-traumatic stress. So after about a year, she moved to California, where she lives now, but she still maintains her Mississippi roots. Her daughter is in Mississippi with their foundation, and she's back and forth. I actually interviewed Mrs. Evers in Mississippi.
Wow.
Very powerful.
The ghost of Mississippi.
Yes, but the people who really struggled, and I always say, even though my book talks about people who did not work in what I call the cauldron of the civil rights movement, like in Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, those southern states, Arkansas, but they really were the heart and soul of the movement. So that is the case.
Speaking of cauldrons,
yes.
and that reminds me of food.
Yes.
Leah Chase.
Oh my.
Did Leah Chase cook for you? Because you know she is that woman when it comes to gastronomical, extraordinary, soul food, southern Louisiana cooking.
Well, Leah Chase, I always say that she is known more by people who follow the James Beard Foundation than some people who follow civil rights, because
which is how I first got acquainted with her.
Because she's considered the queen of Creole cuisine. And so I sat with Mrs. Chase in her restaurant, Dookie Chase restaurant in New Orleans, and the reason she's in there is she and her husband would host meetings of civil rights workers, interracial gatherings, which were against the law. Their business could have been shut down at any time. They could have been raided, but thankfully they were not. Partially because of the respect that the community had for the Chase family. They've always been community oriented, and they started that restaurant not for fortune or fame, but because they wanted to provide that same kind of white tablecloth service that other folks had. So New Orleans had a more genteel type of Jim Crow, but it was Jim Crow.
Can you tell us?
And yes, she did cook for me.
That's what we want to know.
That's why I said, can you tell us?
I got to tell the truth. I was getting ready to leave. We were getting ready to leave. I had a videographer there, and we were getting ready to leave. And she said, well, do you want something to eat? Now, she just sat for about 4 hours without any breaks, and she was 90 then. And I'm looking at George, a videographer, and I'm saying, no, ma'am, we're okay. And she said, you can't leave my restaurant without. She put on her apron.
What did she?
She went in her kitchen. You know, she cooked fried chicken and gumbo.
In New Orleans. That's right.
God.
And she says that
Wow.
in sort of summing up her contribution to the civil rights movement, she said, "Who knew
Yeah.
you could change the world over a bowl of gumbo?"
That's why it's called soul food.
Wow.
Yeah.
You know, when I knew
deep.
you were coming on, I was just, again, very excited. Big shout out to Taj Brown, who said that you were the perfect person for this at this time like this. Tell us about, I know we should read the book, I get it.
The
but
stories, right?
June Jackson Christmas, like, what was that about? Like, how did that story go? Tell us how the entrance, maybe you don't have to tell us what the book says, but tell us the environment when you sat down with her, what that was like.
Well, for
Dr. June Jackson.
Dr. June Jackson Christmas, in her particular case, I went to her apartment. I interviewed her after, unfortunately, her wonderful husband, Walter, had died. And so I've been to their townhouse where they hosted civil rights workers. That's why she's in the book. That they brought, that people who had come up from the South, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee members, they host SNCC, yes, and other people would come to her home for respite. She would provide food. They did fundraising. She would even arrange counseling for them. But I interviewed in her apartment, which of course has beautiful African and African American art in it, and we just sat down. And Dr. Christmas is quite formal. She really is, and she's proud of the fact that she's quite formal. She speaks with clear diction and distinction, like Myrlie Evers.
That's right.
You know, and we just sat down, and it was just, I give her a lot of credit because she's a really fine psychiatrist. She was mental health commissioner in New York City, by the way, under 3 mayors.
That's rough.
3 mayors, right? So
Yeah.
she's good.
She was putting it down. Yeah.
Yeah, she stood
But
the test of time, yeah.
She never once tried to manipulate the interview. She sat down and she answered the question, or she offered more information, yes, to move it along, because she wanted to communicate, to tell the story.
Dr. Bell, I want to ask you, speaking about communicating, telling the story, a lot of our children today are lost, right? And I think through your book, it'll take them back to the struggles and just the things that our people went through. We see with the NFL going on, the different social injustice that's happening in the streets with police. How would you relate this to our children, right? And what form? Because a lot of them don't read. Mm-hmm. So what vehicle would you use?
Well, I think what someone has suggested to me that I probably should do more speaking, which I'm glad to do. I like speaking, so that's good. But also to encourage their parents, many of whom do read,
Right.
to give not just this book. I always say this is just one step in the education progress of our people, and I just want it to be something that inspires people to read further, that the individual stories of the women are fabulous, but collectively they are so powerful, and what they say is really hope for our children. You can feel the love just by reading and what they say. So I think for our children, and I was glad that when Essence did a little shout out for the book,
that was awesome.
and they said just pass it on to the young'uns. So pass it on to the young'uns. But even if they don't get to read the book immediately, let them know.
Let them know the names.
Let them know that people, not just the men, but the women also in the civil rights movement, African American women lit the fires of freedom. They showed vision, they showed courage, they showed tenacity, and they always had a sense of purpose.
Well, I want to ask you, so you wrote about the past, but are there any women that you'd like to interview now in these times, like the founders of the Black Lives Matter movement? Who are the people that
you just said it?
You just said it.
Oh, I mean, but beyond, but there's more. There's more than.
Oh
just
yes, Tarana Burke, of course, with Me Too, because I just read just yesterday, I guess when that film producer was
Oh yeah.
Lorraine. That one.
Go down.
Where in the article they said, and they talked about the how all of this, they essentially indicated that these Hollywood people had founded the Me Too movement. And I went, not exactly. So we have to be vigilant about the present so that that's not distorted for our children.
Right.
But people I would like to interview now, I would actually like to sit down again with a couple of the people in the book and see what they think about now. Because part of my purpose is to lift up their voices. So I try not to interpret what they said. You know, obviously you have some judgment, what have you. But my book was written before the election of 2016. And it would be nice to know how they would then take what they have learned and put that more into lessons for the future. What I say to younger people who ask me that, and a couple of them said, because they didn't really know anything about the history, and then they said, oh, well, you had it so much worse than we do. I said, that's not true. I said, the one thing that we had that a lot of you young people don't have today, we did not have this fantasy of post-racialism. And so we knew that we had to be some 2 times better or 3 times better, and we kept our eyes on the prize. And I said, you can't fall for people who really want to distort your history. I said, what is that? If you don't know your history, you're doomed to repeat it?
Repeat it again.
Yeah.
So I encourage them to do that. And I tell them too, I said, don't put yourself down. You are beautiful, brilliant people, and do not let anyone tell you any different from that.
So your comment recently about the Me Too movement, of course, Jim Crow law allowed black women to be raped, and it was okay. What is your thoughts about today's Me Too movement, where we've been struggling with this for years, and now that it's come to light, based upon, I guess, many white women have now been victimized? Is it insulting to the past, to our ancestors, that this is now a big deal, that it's being commercialized? Or is there a way we can take this example and bring about the history of it to show that there are ways to overcome this?
Well, first of all, I don't think that the women who have been assaulted and raped are the ones commercializing it. I think that the popular media distorts what they're saying, and I think it's important to push some of my white sisters into saying, and some of them are saying it, we did not start this. They have got to be clear. And so it's up to the community of people who care, social justice people, whether they're black or non-black, to really say what the truth is. The truth always will set us free.
Selfish question, selfish self. You leaked a little bit about your age, and so I'm
Yes.
checking you out, right?
That's all right.
And how swift the mind is working, and all these other things. What are some tips you can give so that we can aspire to be as fly, as cognitive, as the mind so liquid at the age that you're performing at? How? Talk to me.
Well, you are so kind, but I have to say that of the women I interviewed a number of them. There's some youngsters, contemporaries like me, who are now in their 68 to 72 range. But I interviewed some women who were, Mrs. Evers was in her 80s, she's in her late 80s now, right? But some women now are in their 90s. Leah Chase was 90 when I interviewed her. She's 95, still working in her kitchen, not every day, but she's still cooking that chicken and making that gumbo.
That's what's
And
up.
so Dr. June Jackson Christmas is still seeing clients, not every day, but she's still doing that. So they maintain a level of activity. They're all lifelong learners. They're all curious about how to. They are not tired. They still have a sense of future. They're always looking forward. So when I say, as one of the youngsters of the group, 71, I have that obligation to try to keep up with them. And I tell young people, it's a little flip for me to say it, but I say it, a lifetime of social justice activism. And knowing that you are not alone, knowing that there are communities of people who care and who will work with you, that's what keeps the energy going, and that's what keeps the mind alert.
Well, Dr. Janet Bell, we are so pleased that you were here. It's been a great experience. I hope we learned something.
I have.
from
I
this.
have. I'm motivated.
Not only
I'm
can you
serious.
look good, but you are also very, 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 very incredibly intelligent
And inspiring.
And inspiring. And so you continue to do your things that you do because you just begun apparently.
Well,
you
thank
got some
you.
more time as well.
Well, your show is intelligent and inspiring. I love it. I'm so appreciative of being able to be with you today.
Our pleasure, trust me.
lighting the fires of freedom, Dr. Janet Bell. Thank you again.
Hey,
We'll be right back.
picture time.
Wow.